They have slept beside us for longer than agriculture existed. Longer than writing. Longer than any city, any kingdom, any civilization that ever rose and fell. They were there before all of it, curled near the fire, watching the same dark trillion our ancestors watched, sharing the warmth and the silence and the danger. We thought we knew where they came from. The story seemed secure. Geneticists had traced the domestic dog back to a founding population. Archaeologists had pointed to dig sites. Researchers had named a region, proposed a timeline, and filed the question under-answered. The dog was domesticated from the gray wolf. The transformation happened once. The origin was somewhere in Eurasia. The genome would confirm it. The genome did not confirm it. What ancient DNA revealed instead was a story so tangled, so unexpectedly deep, and so geographically defiant that it forced researchers to reconsider not just where dogs came from, but whether the question itself had been asked correctly. The origin of the domestic dog may be the most complicated, most debated, and most personally significant domestication event in all of human prehistory. And the closer science looks, the more the old answer dissolves into something far older and far stranger. For most of the 20th century, the dominant model was relatively simple. Dogs descended from gray wolves. That much was not in dispute. What researchers debated was the where and when. By the early 2000s, a wave of genetic studies had begun to point toward East Asia. Studies of mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed down through the maternal line, suggested that modern dogs showed the greatest genetic diversity in East Asian populations. In population genetics, high diversity in a region often indicates long presence. The logic seemed sound. From that, a narrative crystallized. Dogs were domesticated somewhere in East Asia, perhaps in what is now China or the surrounding region, somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years ago. From that founding population, they spread outward with migrating human groups, west into Europe, south into Southeast Asia, eventually crossing into the Americas. It was a clean dispersal model, not unlike the stories told about other domesticated animals. Linguists and archaeologists saw nothing that obviously contradicted it. Ancient dog bones appeared throughout Eurasia. The behavioral relationship between early humans and wolves in forested, prey-rich Asian environments seemed ecologically plausible. The textbooks accepted the model. The consensus held. For a while. The first cracks were small but persistent. European archaeologists kept finding ancient dog remains that, by radiocarbon dating, appeared to predate the arrival of dogs from East Asia by a significant margin. Dogs buried with humans in sites across Western Europe and the Near East seemed old enough to complicate a simple eastward origin. Some of those dates were challenged, revised, or attributed to measurement error. But not all of them could be explained away. Then came an anomaly in the DNA itself. When researchers began analyzing ancient dog genomes, not just modern ones, the picture became asymmetric in a way the simple model had not predicted. Ancient European dogs carried genetic profiles that looked surprisingly distinct from ancient East Asian dogs. Not just different in the way that populations drift apart over time. Different in a way that suggested they might have had separate origins, or had diverged from a common ancestor far earlier than the timeline allowed. The paternal line told one story. The maternal line told another. And when researchers began comparing ancient specimens to modern reference populations, the signals kept pointing in directions that no single origin point could accommodate. Something was off before anyone admitted it officially. The data had been suggesting it for years. Genetics entered the dog origin debate in a serious way in the 2000s and accelerated sharply through the 2010s as ancient DNA sequencing became more powerful and more affordable. The tools available to researchers were the same ones transforming the study of human prehistory. Mitochondrial DNA analysis for maternal ancestry, Y chromosome sequencing for paternal lineages, and, most powerfully, whole genome sequencing, which could read the entire genetic archive of an ancient specimen and compare it to hundreds of others simultaneously. What made ancient dog DNA particularly valuable was what it could reveal about timing. Modern dogs have been shaped by thousands of years of breeding, migration, and human selection. Their genomes reflect all of that accumulated history, which makes it difficult to see the original signal. Ancient specimens, by contrast, are frozen in time. A dog buried 15,000 years ago carries the genomic fingerprint of its moment, unclouded by everything that came after. And when researchers began reading those ancient fingerprints in large numbers, the picture that emerged was not confirmation of the accepted model. It was a completely different kind of question. If this kind of hidden science interests you, the moments when the evidence refuses to behave, subscribe. There is far more of this story still to unravel. The conflict that emerged from the ancient DNA was not a small disagreement. It was a fundamental split in the evidence. On one side stood the East Asian hypothesis, supported by the high diversity of modern dog lineages in that region and by some ancient specimens that did indeed trace ancestry to East Asian wolf populations. On the other side stood a growing body of evidence, ancient genomes from Europe, from the Near East, from Central Asia, that pointed toward a separate and possibly earlier domestication event in the West. The story did not collapse. It widened. Some ancient European dogs showed no meaningful genetic connection to East Asian dogs at all. They appeared to have descended from a Western Eurasian wolf population through a pathway that was entirely independent of whatever happened in Asia. Researchers began to ask whether the word domestication was even describing a single event, or whether it was being applied retroactively to a process that had happened more than once, in more than one place, among more than one group of humans who had each independently arrived at a relationship with wolves that slowly, over generations, became something new. That was not a contradiction. That was a signal. 3 major explanatory frameworks emerged from the debate, and none of them has been conclusively settled. The first held that dogs were domesticated once, probably somewhere in Central or South Asia, and that subsequent migrations of human populations carrying their dogs in both westward and eastward directions eventually produced the apparent divergence. Under this model, the differences between ancient European and ancient East Asian dogs reflected a very early split from a single founding population, followed by thousands of years of independent evolution on separate continents. The diversity seen in East Asia today might reflect not origin but long-term accumulation. The second framework proposed dual domestication, 2 independent events, one in East Asia and one in Western Eurasia, each involving different wolf populations and different human cultures, occurring at different times and producing genetically distinct dog populations. Under this model, the modern domestic dog is not the descendant of one founding event but the product of a merger. When human populations from the East and West eventually came into contact, their dogs mixed, and the resulting hybrid populations became the ancestors of most modern breeds. The East Asian signal that early studies detected might reflect the fact that, in the merger, the Asian lineage eventually became numerically dominant. The third framework was the most disquieting, that domestication was not a discrete event at all, but a recurring, diffuse process, one in which multiple wolf populations across Eurasia entered into various degrees of relationship with various human groups, producing semi-domesticated animals that sometimes interbred with fully wild wolves, sometimes merged with other semi-domestic populations, and only gradually coalesced into what we recognize as dogs over tens of thousands of years. Under this model, looking for a single origin point is like looking for the exact moment a river becomes the sea. Each of these frameworks has genetic evidence in its favor. None has swept the others aside. The study that shifted the field most dramatically came from a large collaborative effort published in the journal Science in 2016, led by a team that included researchers from Ireland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. What made the study exceptional was not just its scope, though it analyzed ancient dog genomes spanning a wider range of time and geography than had previously been attempted, but its methodology. The team combined full mitochondrial genome sequencing with rigorous radiocarbon dating on the same specimens, eliminating one of the persistent sources of error that had plagued earlier studies. The key finding was this: ancient European dogs and ancient East Asian dogs showed such a deep genetic divergence that, if dogs had been domesticated once and then spread, the split between the two lineages would have had to occur very early, possibly before or during the initial domestication event itself. The divergence was too deep to be explained by simple geographic drift after a single founding. The team proposed that the most parsimonious explanation was dual domestication, that dogs were independently domesticated from wolf populations in both eastern and western Eurasia, and that a later migration of people from the east, bringing their dogs with them, had partially replaced the earlier western lineage. The modern dog population was, in their interpretation, a palimpsest, an eastern layer written over a western one, with fragments of the older text still visible if you knew where to look. Not the answer researchers had spent decades building toward. Not even the kind of answer the question had seemed to allow. But the deepest twist in the dog origin story is not geographic. It is temporal. For most of the debate, researchers had been working with an assumption about when domestication occurred. The estimates ranged from 15 to 40,000 years ago, depending on the method and the dataset. That range was already remarkable. It meant dogs had been living with humans since before the last ice age reached its peak, before the extinction of the mammoths, before the peopling of the Americas. Then came ancient DNA from a site in Siberia, a fragment of bone, a genome, and an age estimate that, if it holds under continued scrutiny, places early dog-like canids in association with human populations at a time deeper than almost any previous estimate had suggested. The data may indicate that the relationship between wolves and humans began not with domestication as an act, a human decision to tame an animal, but with something far more gradual and far more mutual. Wolves that were less fearful of humans had access to better food sources near human camps. Humans who tolerated less fearful wolves gained early warning systems, hunting partners, and scavengers that cleaned the camp perimeter. Neither species chose the other. They drifted together through the logic of mutual benefit, over thousands of years of proximity, long before anyone on either side would have recognized what was forming. The genome was not erasing the old story. It was revealing an older one beneath it. What the dog's hidden genomic history ultimately reveals is something that extends far beyond the question of which wolves, in which valley, first approached which campfire. It reveals that the oldest and deepest relationship in human prehistory, the one that preceded every other domestication, every other form of interspecies partnership, was not a human invention. It was a convergence. It happened not once but possibly multiple times, in multiple places, driven not by human ingenuity alone but by a biological process that neither wolves nor humans fully controlled. The domestication of the dog may be less like the domestication of cattle or horses, deliberate, agricultural, purposeful, and more like the slow formation of a symbiosis, the kind that plays out across geological time between species whose survival interests happen to align. That is a different kind of origin story. It gives the dog a different kind of dignity, and it gives the relationship a different kind of depth. Picture the edge of a forest in central Eurasia, perhaps 20,000 years ago. The trees are birch and pine. The ground is frozen. A fire burns in the shallow shelter where a small group of humans has made camp. Somewhere beyond the treeline, eyes catch the firelight and hold it for a moment, amber and still, watching. The humans are not asleep. They have heard something in the dark, the way humans do when the night carries sound differently than the day. They are alert, but they do not reach for their spears, because they know these eyes. Not this particular animal, but this kind. The kind that keeps its distance but does not run. The kind that appears at the margins of the camp in winter, when prey is scarce and the cold makes every calorie precious. They have been watching each other for longer than any of them could measure, the humans and the wolves at the edge, and the distance between them has been shrinking, imperceptibly, for generations. No one has named what is happening. No one will for thousands of years. But the genome of every dog alive today carries that moment in its architecture. The long, cold vigil at the edge of the fire. The patience on both sides of the dark. The question of where dogs came from has not been answered. Not finally. Not cleanly. Researchers continue to analyze new ancient specimens, continue to refine the models, continue to argue about the timing and the geography and the number of founding events. The map remains contested. But what the science has already given us is something more important than a single answer. It has given us the shape of the question, which turns out to be far larger and far older than we imagined. The domestic dog did not arrive in human history through one door, in one place, at one moment. It arrived through a process so gradual, so distributed, and so deeply entangled with the process of human migration itself that separating the two stories may be impossible. We domesticated the dog. But the evidence suggests the dog was also, in its own way, domesticating us, training us, generation by generation, to be the kind of animals that could form alliances across species lines. Teaching us, perhaps, something about trust. The genome preserved what the campfire could not. And what it preserved is not an origin. It is a relationship without a beginning. Subscribe if you want more stories where the evidence rewrites the oldest maps, because the human past is far deeper and far stranger than the version we were given.